The snow came down in thick, blinding sheets, the kind that swallowed the world whole and made even the sound of a horse's hoofs vanish into silence, and for Clara Weston, the sheriff's only daughter, it felt like the storm had conspired with fate to test her strength, her patience, and her courage. She had set out that morning with a basket of supplies, determined to deliver food and medicine to the O'Malley family who lived up near Miller's Ridge, because her father, Sheriff Weston, had been called away on duty and she had promised her mother that she would help with the town's needs while he was gone. The air had been cold, yes, but not dangerous when she left. Still, mountain weather was a fickle beast, and as afternoon settled, dark clouds had rolled in over the peaks and unleashed a fury of snow that now wrapped the valley in a merciless grip. Her mare, Daisy, snorted and struggled against the growing drifts, every step harder than the last, and Clara's fingers had gone numb inside her woolen gloves, her face raw from the icy sting of wind. She told herself she could make it. She was a Weston after all, raised to be strong, raised with grit, her father always saying she had more backbone than half the deputies in town, but the truth was, panic had begun to claw at the edges of her heart. The road was gone, buried under a white wasteland. The trees that lined the ridge loomed like shadows, twisted and unfamiliar. Every direction looked the same. She was lost. Clara pressed her hand against Daisy's neck, whispering to calm the nervous mare, when suddenly a branch cracked behind her, sharp against the howl of the storm. She whipped her head around, eyes straining through the flurry, and at first she thought her mind was playing tricks. A figure moved between the trees, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a heavy coat dusted white. He was leading a horse, dark and strong, and he moved with the ease of someone who knew these mountains like his own blood. As he stepped closer, Clara's breath caught. She knew that face, or rather, she knew the reputation. The rugged jaw covered in stubble, the scar that ran just above his brow, the piercing gray eyes that didn't flinch from the storm, this was no ordinary traveler. This was the outlaw her father had hunted for months, the man whispered about in saloons and around firelight stories, the one who had robbed stages, outwitted posses, and disappeared into the high country like a ghost. His name was Cole Mercer. And now, he stood no more than 20 feet from her, his gaze locked on hers with something unreadable flickering in his expression. Clara's pulse hammered in her ears. She should reach for the small pistol her father insisted she carry. She should warn him back, shout, do anything but sit frozen in the saddle, yet fear and the biting cold seemed to root her in place. Cole raised a gloved hand slowly, palm open, the gesture surprisingly calm, almost reassuring. "Easy there," he called over the wind, his voice deep, steady, carrying the tone of a man who knew how to command without shouting. "Your horse is about to founder in this snow. You keep pressing her, you'll both be down before dark." Clara swallowed hard, her breath fogging in quick bursts. "Stay back," she managed, though her voice trembled more from cold than courage. "I know who you are." Cole's mouth curved into the ghost of a smile, not cruel, but not soft either, the kind of smile that said he'd heard it all before. "Then you know I don't scare easy," he replied. "But I'm not here to take anything from you, not unless you count keeping you alive." He stepped closer, his horse snorting, the storm swirling around them like some furious curtain, and though every warning bell in Clara's mind screamed at her to run, something else in his eyes, a flicker of sincerity, of determination, made her hesitate. The mare stumbled, her legs trembling, and Clara nearly pitched forward from the saddle. In an instant, Cole was there, one strong hand gripping Daisy's reins, the other steadying Clara by the arm. His touch was firm, warm even through her coat, and she hated the shiver that ran down her spine, not from cold this time, but from the strange, unwelcome realization that safety might actually lie in this outlaw's hands. "You'll freeze out here," he said, his tone sharp now, no room for argument. "There's a cabin not far. You can fight me all you want after, but right now, we move." Clara wanted to protest, wanted to say she didn't need him, that she'd rather die in the snow than take help from a criminal, but when another gust of icy wind tore through her cloak and stole her breath, she realized she didn't have a choice. Survival came first, and for all she knew, this man truly meant what he said. With reluctance heavy in her chest, she gave a small nod. Cole wasted no time. He tied Daisy's reins to his own horse and guided both beasts forward, his other hand never straying far from Clara's elbow as if to ensure she wouldn't collapse. Step by step, through drifts that swallowed their boots, through the storm that shrieked like a living thing, he led her. And though she wanted to despise him, wanted to cling to every warning her father had ever drilled into her about men like Cole Mercer, Clara couldn't shake the gnawing truth: without him, she might already be another frozen soul lost to the mountain. The storm had raged all night, battering the small mountain cabin until its timbers creaked like the bones of an old ship at sea, and when Clara Weston opened her eyes the next morning, it took her several seconds to remember where she was and how she had come to be lying beneath a thick quilt on a narrow cot with a fire crackling in the hearth. The air was warmer here, though faint drafts slipped through the gaps in the logs, and the smell of wood smoke and coffee hung in the room. She sat up slowly, her body sore from cold and exhaustion, and then her gaze landed on the man at the table. Cole Mercer sat there with his long legs stretched out, one boot propped on a stool, his coat shrugged off to reveal a rough shirt clinging to broad shoulders. His hat rested on the table beside a revolver, and steam curled from the tin mug in his hand. He didn't look surprised to see her awake. He just studied her with those gray eyes, steady and unreadable, until Clara's pulse stumbled and heat rose in her cheeks. She hated that reaction, hated that some part of her found him compelling even though he was her father's sworn enemy. "You made it through the night," he said at last, his voice low, carrying a hint of amusement. "That's more than most would have done out there." Clara bristled, pulling the quilt tighter around her shoulders. "I didn't have much of a choice, did I? You dragged me here." Cole tilted his head, the corner of his mouth twitching. "Dragged? You'd have been buried in snow if I left you. You can call it what you like, sweetheart, but saving. His words struck like a spark, equal parts infuriating and disarming, and Clara forced herself to look away, to focus on the fire instead of the outlaw who somehow made the tiny cabin feel even smaller. The hours stretched slow that morning. The storm showed no sign of letting up, wind shrieking against the shutters, snow piling higher outside the door. Cole busied himself with chores, splitting wood, checking the horses in the lean-to, always moving with that calm efficiency of a man who'd lived hard and learned to rely only on himself. Clara tried to stay aloof, tried to remind herself that every second spent in his company was dangerous, that if word ever reached town she'd be ruined, or worse, accused of aiding him, but the longer they were trapped together, the harder it became to hold on to that sharp edge of mistrust. He cooked beans over the fire, handed her a plate without ceremony, and when she hesitated, his brow furrowed. "Eat," he said simply. "You'll need strength when this blows over." She did, and the warmth that spread through her body felt like betrayal, as though accepting even this small kindness was a step onto treacherous ground. Yet she couldn't deny the truth: without him, she wouldn't be alive to eat anything at all. By evening, when the snow finally eased enough to see a pale glow on the horizon, tension hung in the cabin like smoke. Clara had spent the day pacing, her thoughts circling the same dilemma: how to escape, how to get back to town, how to warn her father that his greatest quarry was right here under her nose. But each time she glanced at Cole, at the way he sharpened his knife by the firelight or scribbled notes in a battered journal, she found herself hesitating. He didn't act like the cold-blooded outlaw the stories painted. He wasn't cruel. He hadn't once threatened her. If anything, he seemed lonely. Burdened. And that was dangerous in a whole new way, because it made her wonder if there was more truth in his eyes than in all the warnings she had been raised on. When darkness fell, he finally spoke again, his voice quieter now, almost reflective. "I know you think I'm the devil himself, sheriff's daughter. But not every story told about a man is the whole of him. Sometimes the law don't care about right or wrong. Sometimes the law just cares about making someone a villain." Clara met his gaze across the firelight, her heart thudding, torn between loyalty to her father and the unsettling pull of the man before her. She should dismiss his words, but instead she whispered, "And what are you, Cole Mercer? Villain or something else?" He didn't answer at once. He just looked at her, long and hard, as though weighing the risk of honesty, and when he finally spoke, his voice was raw. "I'm a man who's lost too much. A man who ain't had a reason to stop running. Until maybe now." The silence that followed was heavy, charged, the storm outside paling against the storm that stirred inside Clara's chest. The storm had broken by morning, leaving the mountains wrapped in a silence so sharp it almost hurt, the world buried under a glittering white that stretched as far as Clara's eyes could see when Cole pushed open the cabin door and stepped out into the brittle air. She followed slowly, clutching her cloak tight, her breath catching at the sight of the valley transformed into a frozen sea of drifts and crystal-laced pines, beautiful but deadly. Cole squinted against the rising sun, his hand shading his eyes, and she realized he wasn't admiring the view, he was scouting, measuring distance, planning escape. Always the outlaw, never at rest. He turned back toward her, and for a moment she caught something unguarded in his expression, something almost gentle, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. "We move today," he said. "Snow's deep, but if we wait, the law might sniff their way up here. Your pa's got hounds in his blood when it comes to chasing me." The word struck Clara like a whip, reminding her of the truth she'd almost let slip into the background during their confinement. The man who had kept her alive, who had made her laugh once despite herself, was still the fugitive her father had sworn to bring to justice. She should be grateful to escape him, not anxious at the thought of leaving the cabin behind. And yet, she was both. That war raged inside her as they saddled the horses, as Cole showed her how to wrap cloth over her mouth and nose against the bitter wind, as he adjusted her stirrup with a care that made her cheeks burn. He didn't have to touch her hand when he helped her mount, but he did, and though it was only a second, the warmth of his palm lingered like a brand. They set out through the drifts, the horses pushing slow but steady, steam curling from their nostrils in the morning light. The silence between them grew heavier with every mile, not cold, but taut, filled with unspoken words. Clara kept stealing glances at him, at the way he rode tall in the saddle, scanning the ridges with a sharpness that came from years of running, and she wondered how a man could be both dangerous and protective, both hunted and human. She wanted to ask why he'd saved her, what he expected in return, but every time the words formed, they died on her tongue. It was Cole who finally broke the silence hours later when they stopped at a stream choked with ice. "You know what'll happen when we hit town, don't you?" he said, his voice flat, eyes fixed on the frozen water. "Your father'll see me and he won't care if I carried you out of hell itself. He'll put me in irons, or a bullet in my back." Clara's throat tightened. She wanted to deny it, wanted to promise she'd speak for him, that she'd tell the truth of what had happened, but deep down she knew Cole was right. Sheriff Weston's justice was sharp and uncompromising, and he would never let his daughter's rescuer go free if that rescuer bore the name Cole Mercer. "Maybe," she whispered, her breath misting the air, "but maybe there's a way to make him listen." Cole looked at her then, and the raw intensity in his gaze made her breath falter. "You're either the bravest girl I've ever met, or the most foolish," he said softly. "Either way, you've got fire in you, Clara Weston. More than I deserve to be near." He turned away before she could answer, spurred his horse forward, and left her to wrestle with the ache that bloomed in her chest, a dangerous, impossible ache that had nothing to do with the cold moon.